Welcome everybody to Transit Equity Day 2025. I'm Mark Kleinitz. I'm up in Mallets Bay. I'm a Sierra Club volunteer and I'm going to act as a facilitator today. Today is Rosa Parks' birthday. And in honor of her heroism, I want to share a quote attributed to her. Stand for something or you will fall for anything. Today's mighty oak is yesterday's nut that held its ground. So hold your ground. We welcome you on Rosa Parks' birthday to Transit Equity Day. This event is made possible by efforts from the Sierra Club, the Vermont Natural Resources Council, 350 Vermont, and speakers sharing their stories from Green Mountain Transit, the Vermont Center for Independent Living, and others impacted by the lack of convenient and safe transit. The Transit Equity Group was started by the Labor Network for Sustainability with the idea that transit is a civil right. Everyone, workers, riders, and everyday residents should have access to reliable, affordable transit. Rosa Parks' historic protest was against the unequal access of African Americans to public transit. And yet, to this day, unequal access to public transit based on race, income, and disability have persisted and have, to a degree, become worse with cuts in public funding for transit and fare increases. And I'll put a link up to their website. We want to be respectful for time, and we'll try to run for about an hour. We will have responses and question and answer period at the end. If the conversation is ongoing, we can continue at about 1:30. So I'd like to start out by welcoming you all and to welcome Katie Gallagher from the Vermont Natural Resources Council for an action request. Katie.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Mark. I work with the Vermont Natural Resources Council in our Sustainable Communities program. And as part of that work, I coordinate the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition, which we have several members of, with us today, but we are a broad group of folks who are talking about transportation and trying to raise up its importance at the Vermont State House from the perspective of the environment, but also affordability and accessibility, local economic development, et cetera. And public transit has really risen this year in particular, but over the past couple of years as a really urgent issue that we need to bring more political will to provide the investments needed in our public transit system so that all Vermonters have the ability to get to where they need to go. So as part of that effort, I wanted to share a petition that the coalition is sharing with organizations and individuals and hoping to get sign-ons for to share with our state senators and representatives this year. So I'll put it in the chat in a second. And you can see on the Transportation for Vermonters website my contact information there, but feel free to reach out to myself or Rob with the Sierra Club if you have any questions either about the petition or what's going on in the State House and you'd be interested in a legislative update. But I'll put that in the chat and thank you for the time.
Up next, we have Jamie Smith from Green Mountain Transit is going to talk about the stories and the challenges that they face.
Thank you so much, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm just here to talk a little bit about Green Mountain Transit's current position, where we are financially, some of the challenges that we've been facing over the last several years. If you follow along with Green Mountain Transit service, you will know that we are currently in an unsteady fiscal situation, and we've been having a lot of very public conversations about transportation funding, reductions in service. Our board has been talking about this pretty much every single meeting for the last year plus, but these conversations started prior to the pandemic. There's a long history of not sustainable funding for transportation, not specifically from the state, but I think, every transportation agency in the state of Vermont probably could use more funding to do more things to provide more access to folks across the state. So we have been working with the legislature and Vermont DOT the last several years to identify a sustainable path forward, and what that looks like. So certainly, like I said, our financial situation started prior to the pandemic, but in 2020, when things started to get really bad nationally, GMT made some decisions to one, go fare free. That was to limit exposure points to our drivers, to our riders, to keep transportation as safe as possible, so folks were not getting on board, getting sick. We were still bringing essential workers to and from their jobs. And so we did that as a containment measure. And then COVID relief funds masked a lot of the financial issues that we had started talking about prior to the pandemic. It's a confusing timeline, but right before we went fare free, before pandemic changes went into effect, our board had voted to do a fairly significant service reduction that was paused due to some of the COVID relief funds that we were receiving as an organization. Certainly across our Chittenden County service is struggling right now, but across the state, our other rural providers are also in a similar position. We've struggled with workforce and CDL shortages, capacity issue of our staff, which has seen a 38-ish% reduction over the last 10 years. Cost of service has increased as we talk about, wages and just, economics. And fare free service, was in effect for quite a long time. And through support from the state of Vermont, we were able to continue fare free service for an additional year beyond when we had planned to do so. But the cost to upgrade the infrastructure, because our fare boxes had been sitting idle for many years, was significant. And so some of the funds provided was just to get our equipment back up and running. So we've been collecting fares for 6 months now, and we are meeting a 10% target that we had set and that we had told the legislature that we would set. But we still look forward and see that there's more financial impacts on the horizon. Specifically, we're looking at another significant service reduction likely in June. And then we have about 1 fiscal year buffer, but our FY27 finances are looking a little more dire than they are now. So we started a very public campaign and public meeting process to get feedback from people regarding service reductions. We took these, reductions to public meeting and received comments. You'll hear a little later from Helena, who is one of our riders. She's very, very dependent on our system. And she also works with a group of folks who also depend on GMT services. So these reductions really impact her, and we know that they're impactful to others around the state. So we started a Voices of Transit public campaign where we started taking rider stories and rider testimonials, allowing them the opportunity to share how public transportation impacts their lives and what would happen with a lack of public transportation. So we are working on that now. We continue to collect stories. We brought some of those with us last week to the State House, just so we could, share that more widely. But again, we're doing a marketing campaign that is, public marketing and social media marketing. And so you'll start to see some of those stories emerge over the coming months. And I will drop a link in the chat for folks. We have a share your story page on our website where other folks can come on. They can share their story about how public transportation helps them in their life, how they are able to get to medical appointments or jobs or housing, whatever the situation may be. It's not all impacts of service reductions. We're just hearing a lot of stories about how public transportation impacts people's everyday lives. So I will drop that link, and then shortly you'll hear from Helena, who's one of our riders. And at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. And next up, we have Connie Beal, who's Working Bridges Director of United Way of Northwest Vermont, and we'll talk about transportation challenges that she sees.
Thank you all. It's so good to be here. I appreciate being included in the conversation. My name's Connie Beal, she, they, Director of Working Bridges at United Way of Northwest Vermont. We are in our 19th year of partnering with local employers to support employee retention and advancement, as well as overall financial stability. Many of you might know our keystone strategy that is called resource coordination. And so we have a team of highly trained resource coordinators that support
as you would expect resource coordination.
Many of you recognize that in your work. And at the root of our work with Working Bridges is that we recognize that jobs are a source of economic empowerment and opportunity, mobility, and that employment can unlock prosperity. Transportation. So the reason I'm here today is I want to talk a little more about the impact of transportation resources in disrupting scarcity and creating opportunity. Transportation is an essential resource for Vermont's workforce infrastructure. To keep a job for many rural living Vermonters, we are required to have a personal vehicle. Often we work with employees through our program who are one car repair away from losing a job, or one bus voucher away from a missed shift, or for whom there are no flexible transportation options that allow the employee to take overtime to advance or to take on more responsibility in their employment goals. In 2024, we served well over 1,600 employees and adult students through CCV. In 19 years, transportation needs are consistently within the top 5 reasons employees seek assistance at work. It's also one of the biggest reasons employees leave a job, usually unexpectedly. The disruption and the scarcity that creates at work cannot be ignored for both the employer and the employees and the productivity of the work. There are glimmers of hope and innovation and things that work. And I want to share that because I think we want more of the good things. The things that our program and what we see working with employers as far as solutions, we see incentivizing carpooling, creating opportunity for employees to learn more about purchases around vehicle and sharing vehicles. We see efforts that engage employers in solutions that can be customized are really where it's at. So small dollar funding, Vermont Employment Transportation Initiative, or the VETI Fund, was a small dollar fund that could help employees navigate those sudden changes with transportation, whether it was to get a bus voucher so they could get that ride, or maybe help them with gas or car repair so they could keep the job. The Rides to Recovery program and Job Access program through GMT has been significant for our program. We partnered with GMT to
Okay, is this a freezing on my end?
It's not safe. It's not going to run much longer. It's going to cost them more in the long run. And at the end of the day, there are very few resources that are going to help people move from that kind of vehicle to a more sustainable transportation solution. Van pooling is something some of our employer partners do. The larger companies, the smaller companies struggle to do that. So I do think there's room for us to explore how we create a more nimble van pooling system, or how we might partner with our transit providers in that space. And you think of our employers. I know in central Vermont, the Gopher Community Rides program is operating a pilot for on-demand shuttle style. I say shuttle style, but it's more of a commuter service, really meant for employees to keep those good jobs. I get really excited about that because I think if you can work with employers to identify the need, it's much more customized and individualized to the shifts and the kinds of work people are doing. And very human-centered. It sort of positions the worker first and the employer within the context of that community and the benefits that might be available internally. I also, Working Bridges, in this last 5 years, we stood up a small dollar fund called the 185 Bridge Fund. And this fund supports employees with specific resources like bus vouchers, gas money, car repair, really in a way of, in some ways, it replaced the VETI resource. It is completely community donor driven. Scarcity shows up in the workplace in a lot of ways, and many employers, maybe not all, but many, I think, are at a time post-COVID, the height of COVID. I think we learned that employers do believe they have a responsibility to provide transportation solutions, and I think that's an area for us to explore further and give our partnership and attention to that space because we know the needs there. And so Working Bridges as a program in Northern Vermont now, we are across Northwest and Northeast and Central Vermont. We are working with 34 different employers who have people that need to get back and forth to work. So really leaning into community partnership and supporting transportation options for employees could start with engaging business in these creative ways and continuing to support innovative solutions like GMT's on-demand approaches. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And like I say, we'll have a chance at the end, our speakers, you can ask questions and give responses. Next up, we have Peter Jonke from Plainfield, Vermont, and the Vermont Center for Independent Living, and tell his story.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm happy to be here. I do, excuse me, just a minor correction. I live in East Calais, Vermont, but it's a very rural area. And there is limited public transit there. A former colleague of mine, Dick Parker, was supposed to tell their story today, but unfortunately they were ill and were not able to make this. But I know Dick, and one of the reasons that he was so dependent on public transit was that he couldn't afford a car. And we know from lots of data that it's quite expensive to maintain a car. And if you're, minimum wage job, it makes it really, really difficult. So it just really emphasizes the greater need to make sure public transit is available, and the more options that are available for public transit, the better. So different pilots are great. Maintaining what we have rather than scaling back is really essential. I refer to myself as a carless traveler because of my disability, I don't drive. And as one of the things that I would not be able to be living where I am and working where I am if it weren't for public transit. And I wouldn't be able to get to medical appointments if it weren't for public transit. And there's a lot of data that shows that because of the lack of public transit, medical appointments are routinely missed. It's one of the biggest problems in terms of healthcare and people maintaining their healthcare because they don't have access to public transit in the way that it's needed. And a lot of times, so a lot of things have to change. And I think the culture needs to change in terms of people recognizing the importance of public transit, and it's really a need for everybody, not just, you know, quote unquote those people. Because if we can all hook into public transit, the more people you have on the bus, the less the cost becomes, and you also help protect the environment. And so there's a whole host of reasons that I've talked about a little bit that really speak to the need to increasing public transit as we age. You know, the data shows that, you know, in a few years there are going to be more people 80 and over in Vermont, and they're not all going to be able to drive. And so as that population increases, the need for public transit is also going to increase. So there's just a lot of reasons that it's so important that we increase public transit. We embrace different options for public transit, and we want to make sure we have a sustainable process for funding public transit. And thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And up next, Helena, if you're back with us.
Hi.
And-
Yeah.
oh, that's great.
So actually it's Helena, but no worries. Easy mistake. So hopefully everyone can hear me. My volume's a little funky today, but thank you for having me here. Yes, I live in rural Vermont, like many of us, and public transit is definitely difficult for me, especially having a disability, not being able to drive due to that disability. And ultimately having to, as of now, kind of rely on roommates and others to coordinate rides with me, so I can get to and from the Montpelier Transit Center so I can get up to work every night. And so I know that the bus route that I generally rely on, it's the Montpelier Link Express. And as most of us are aware in this meeting, I believe that is one of the bus routes that is going to be potentially, if not affected, by some of the changes going on within GMT. And something I've noticed is that a positive thing is that it's always packed. It's always a packed ride. It's always a packed bus when I'm on it. So I know for certain that a lot of people rely pretty heavily, myself included, on public transit, because I'm a GMT rider, regular. And I think by either getting rid of these bus routes, cutting them down so they aren't to the general, the current hours, the current pickups, drop-offs. If you cut out the routes, then that's really going to be impacting our communities and both ridership, as a person with disability, certainly within various communities, especially. And I know that that's going to be very impactful for me in a negative way if our rides are no longer accessible to us. Because then I will have to rely on the carpooling situations with people generally, which will be difficult. Can't always work out. There's certainly cost burdens that that add up with these changes that will be going on. So financial um, as well as more personal, emotional, like feeling the cost of, okay, carpooling with friends or roommates. Okay, have to pay them to help get you to and from places. A lot of working pieces to this whole situation. So I just believe having greater access would be very helpful to public transit. And I know it's probably a lot easier said than done because a lot of work and pieces to it. But yeah, there's certainly cost burdens that can accumulate to this, to the whole situation. And it puts pressure on many of us too, me, I already feel bad enough that I have to ask people for rides, and even in the more public current transit friendly areas, there are certain cuts being made and certain adjustments, and for folks who also want to move to more populated areas that have more reliable public transit, um, you want to make sure those transit services are available in those areas so folks can move to the areas, and if that makes sense as well. So yeah, ultimately, really having access to public transportation, and just more importantly, the reliable public transportation access. It gives us all as a community like a real feeling of also independence and freedom too, especially for those who do not have public means, like their own individual means of public transit, or or can just drive to the bus stop and then take the transit routes every single day. Um, so, and I do know that going back to the kind of question about appointments, I've noticed that that is something I do have to cancel more regularly, is like when I have doctor's appointments or any upcoming appointments, I'll have to sometimes call in and say, hey, I can't do it. Can we schedule another time? I have to coordinate rides because there's no transit out in my area, and have to coordinate well in advance with people in order to make those appointments available and accessible to me. Because yeah, I just have to do a lot of coordination, and I think stuff that would help me, if GMTA doesn't cut or drastically cut the major bus routes, bus lines in the state. And also another thing that could really help is just being able to move to a region of the state that offers the reliable access to transportation. Um, but how can someone do that if those transit services are ultimately being cut too in their regions? I've spoken with others before who have said, yeah, I moved to such and such place because of the public transit line, which is literally right on their route. And now services are being cut or in discussion of being cut. And that can really be impactful to people's lives, not just transit related, but it's impactful to people's livelihoods and well-beings. And I think if our legislature and senators put more of their time, energy, resource into accessing or finding more funding to better support public transit and help to sustain the services we have, just really improve it, put more funding money towards the public transit system, I think we could see more of a positive impact on the greater community, because Vermont is very rural to begin with, and having access to those routes, to the public transit services is it's pretty critical to a lot of us who are already starting to feel the impact. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Telling your story. It's certainly, there's a lot of room we could improve and start a virtuous cycle. More people being able to get the jobs and doctor's appointments will actually help grow the economy as well. Next up, we have Mr. Matthew LaFleur, who's a member of Sierra Club from Alburgh and also a member of the Vermont Climate Council's Just Transition Subcommittee. Matthew.
Yes, greetings everyone. And don't forget, Vermont Equity Leagues of Cities and Towns, a committee member and a commission member of the state of Vermont too as well. So literally I'm on pretty much, if I'm not on everywhere around across the state, and then I'm it as is. For me in my town and my region of Grand Isle and Franklin County, accessibility and accommodation under the American with Disability Act is mandatory in state federal law. It's both, We can't ignore that, and we can't dismiss that, because that's what costs the state of Vermont itself money, or gets in trouble because it knows its mandates. For me, in my region, it's limited as is. It's not just not it's available, but it's limited because of, like you said, there's rural, and rural. Vermont, like many other callers on here, rural communities, rural states, rural, you name it. Transportation is a big issue, not just, for me, but also for my accessibility and accommodation. I'm also a person with disability, but the way I look at it is equity in the whole entire thing. And it ain't just, we're looking at people first, second, and third shift, repeat, first, second, and third shift. There's availability for first and second, but third shift is overnight shifts, which a lot of people do overnight jobs in the state of Vermont that don't get transportation. Pretty much they're on their own at this point. So that includes doctors, nurses, the ones that help us survive. They don't have any means of public transit. And they're, if they can't get to work, then pretty much we're all in trouble. But also I look at this as an equity lens, not just in my, region, but also across the state of Vermont as a whole, because, you want to compensate people for the hard work they do. Public transportation is a business regardless, but we want to compensate anyone or everyone. And this is just my opinion here. It's just, transportation, should be made available 24/7, in my opinion. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't have to rely or ask, hey, I need this public transportation to go to my doctor's, or I need to go to the grocery store, but I don't have public transportation. You should, as a person with disability, you should not have to even ask for that. It should be already mandated and accommodated for it. But we also know tools, resources, finances. Finance is a big hurdle across the transportation sector of Vermont in general. I mean, it's a rural state. It's a big, it's the infrastructure of the transportation system that's sometimes outdated, and it needs a lot of money to, provide those resources. And for me, it's just in my region or my area, there's none, literally. If it's one fixed route, that's it. But if you're an overnight shift worker, or second shift, we'll just say 6 to 8, you start at 6 p.m., then you end at 8 p.m., you're done. You don't have no transportation. If you're an overnighter, which is third shifts, if they call it, you have no ways and means of getting back and forth to your job. And for me, it's like, then we got our volunteer, sector, which is hit hard the most, because the way I look at it is, it should be compensated. Everything is a business in Vermont. If you want to provide those businesses, then you got to compensate people for those businesses. You can't do things always free on the back of organizations, or just because you feel like it's the best way to move forward. It really doesn't work that way. Business is business. You got to pay people sooner or later. You got to pay them for what they do. For me in my area, in my region, it's just, there's lack of transportation in general. I mean, we got one fixed bus route, that's the GMT 118 or 116, that goes from here to St. Albans, and that is it. There's nothing else out here. And there's not even taxis. There are some GMT vans, but like I said, it's all limited, because I think it's finance. That's the biggest thing that, that's hurting everybody. It's how can we make it more efficient in a way where transportation should be an on-demand, service, and say, hey, I want a transportation from here to the store. I don't want to have to beg or have to go to court to get that settled. I just want transportation just to get my basic access needs met. And how can I do that? One, I think we need to, tell our legislators, elected officials, the agencies, Agency of Transportation. It ain't just GMT. There's a reason why it's called Agency of Transportation. Tell them that, we need more finance. Tell them that, if this was you on the streets, and if you're trying to get a job and we just said, oh, unfortunately, we can't help you, it then affects the whole entire, network. It's a big spider web, and it's a collaboration effort to have this big, important work together. And collaboration is key. If we can't collaborate, then we can't survive as a small state. And we can't survive as community members of a state if we don't have those provisions in place. So what I would like to see is more collaboration work, because that's the best way to get things done. And it may not be the prettiest things in some realms of, the agency of Vermont, but, but at the all out offset of this is, the outcomes. You want positive outcomes within your communities. You want individual communities to participate, in government. They can't participate if they don't have transportation. They can't do A, B, C, or D, which meaning we lose, plain and simple. Even in the votes, we lose because we're not participating enough, or we're not doing outreach enough, or we think, one way, but we should be thinking innovations to the systems that we have in place. Because Vermont sees it one way. Let's try innovating and try it doing a different way to meet the needs of the vast majority of Vermonters. That includes, community of color, marginalized communities, low income, individuals with disabilities. Let's not, it just, veterans, senior citizens. We already know and identify the demographics of Vermont. We say Vermont's an aging system, aging generation. Guess what? We should be already adapting to that. It seems like, in my opinion, that we have a lot way to go on this to promote this, but also making sure that everybody's individual access need is met. Even the legislators, they're not going to tell you this, but they have individual access needs that need to be met too as well. Everybody has them. So just to ask for basic, hey, I want transportation. I don't have to beg for this. Please support me so I can go to work, so I can go to a doctor's appointment, so I can go to, get groceries. If I'm asking that, I'm hoping and praying I get that service. But we also know that finance is a big thing, and we just have to find, ways to, still mandated under the America with Disability Act to make those needs that are mandated, and yes, it's mandated to, provide those services regardless of how it looks, but also making sure that everybody has that, safety line that they're looking for. I'm hoping this message, reaches out far and wide. I'm hoping that equity can now be ingrained within the transportation sector of agency of Vermont. So we don't want to leave people behind. We want to make sure that Vermont thrives. That means our economic thrives. Our economic thrives, we survive. If we survive, then we have a way to move forward. But it all depends on, what we do here and now to promote, the accessibility and accommodation for everybody that lives here. And that includes, communities of color too as well. That's let's not forget, members of the public, that really need the transportation the most, So yeah, so that's it for me. I look forward for Q&A, and I'm looking forward to, to expand it on this topic of and in innovation with technology. How can we approach this in a more collaborative way moving forward? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. That's great. And I'm sure we have a bunch of questions already getting started. Before we do that, though, I'd like to ask Katie to come back, and she wants to do what an action might be and talk to that. Katie, you here still?
Yep. Thanks,
Okay,
Mark.
great. All right.
And thanks to all of our speakers. That was really informative and just, oh man, so in in our work, we talk with a lot of legislators and folks and try to communicate this. And there's been some questions in the chat that I hope that we can dig into a little bit more. But I think that there's this overarching narrative that I've seen and heard across the state where, essentially because we're a rural state, we just need to drive. And, maybe there's some people who don't have access to vehicles, but it seems to be forgotten or pushed aside or phrased as kind of an extra. If we have extra money, we'll get to that. But to Matthew's point and the speakers before him, this is meeting people's basic needs. And in addition, it provides so many other economic, social, environmental benefits. So just really appreciate everybody who has provided their insights and experiences today. Just wanted to reiterate for folks who joined us a little late that we are looking for petition signers, and I'll put the link in the chat again. This is for the petition led by the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition, which is a broad coalition working in the State House to try to support sustainable, dedicated funding for our public transit system. And we're hoping as well to get folks to reach out to their legislators. As was mentioned in the chat, there's a lot of new legislators who, as folks probably have heard, with the last election cycle, there's a lot of turnover. So both in general in the legislature as well as specifically in the both transportation committees, there's a lot of new members and folks who haven't been participating in these conversations to date. And so just the more relationship building and education that we can do up front is really helpful. So whether you are someone who is dependent on transit or not, wants to just advocate for a more sustainable transit system, I would really urge you to reach out to your legislators individually and share that message. And then as well, just highlighting again, Green Mountain Transit's share your story slides. And there was also a question in the chat for folks who aren't within GMT's service area. How can you share your stories? And I'll share the links for all of these again, but Transportation for Vermonters also has a tell your story option on our website where we've been collecting some stories as well. We're hoping to potentially have more of a public event in the next couple of months before this legislative session is over to bring together all of these voices and really showcase public support for this need. So I hope folks stay in touch, and we'll certainly be sharing more information as those potential events develop. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. We'll open it up now to responses, questions, comments you might want to make. You're telling your story if you want. We had some people write in the comments, the chat area. I don't know if any of the speakers want to address those as well.
And Mark, everybody, this is Rob Kiddo, the Vermont chapter of the Sierra Club. I just want to acknowledge that we do have one representative who's been a really great champion of a lot of these issues. She made a couple comments on here, Representative Lenora Dodge from Essex. Lenora, are you able to say something, or are you in a position you can't? But we would welcome you to maybe say something if you can.
Hi, good afternoon, folks, and thank you for putting this together. I am home in Essex sick, so I'm not in Montpelier today, but this was a really great opportunity to hear from the folks directly that often don't get a voice in our state house, sadly. So I thank everybody who's responsible for amplifying those voices today. Thank you, Rob. And I was really struck by the testimony or stories of how this all affects employers and all the extra effort that United Way folks, I guess, have been trying to work towards. What Connie was explaining about uniting our workforce with our employers. And I think that that's the story that often goes untold. I think there's like two sides to the coin, right? Public transit is for the most vulnerable folks in our population. We know that they tend to be overrepresented on our public transit system. The people that ride our buses tend to either be lower income or have a disability, and often do not own their own vehicles. So this is the only alternative to getting to places that people with vehicles take for granted. You know, like I need to go to the bank, I need to go to work, I need to go to the doctor, I need to get my kid to school, etc. And but the other part of the story is the people that count on consumers and on workforce without having to pay them, you know, more than $30 an hour for them to own their own vehicle. You know, so I really think that we need to speak up about both of those. And so you've done that today. I would say that the Transportation Committee, which I sat on last year, was asked to fund to help cover some of the funding for the shortfalls that GMT was facing. And you had a lot of voices on the committee to support that. But I think the reality is also that you have a lot of voices that are very concerned with our climate targets and the loss of EV rebates and you know, rebuilding our villages and our bridges that have been destroyed with so many extreme climate disasters, and shrinking revenues because we don't have as many people, you know, we don't have as many tax dollars from gas sales. So the reality is that we really do have to make a case for funding public transit because it's competing against a lot of other funding needs. So that's all I wanted to say. I don't really want to, you know, judge what I specifically asked for the Transportation Committee to submit a request for appropriating money for public transit in the Budget Adjustment Act. And I now sit on housing, and in my housing committee, I got our committee to request to put in a sentence in our Budget Adjustment Act request saying that we would like to amplify any requests for funding that the Transportation Committee made for public transit, because our housing crisis can't be solved without resolving also our transportation crisis. Sadly, we can't amplify an ask for something that was not asked for. So that's where we're at.
Great. Thank you. I see David, you have your hand up there if you want to make a comment or field a question. David Lutz. You're muted still, David, if you're trying to come through. David? Well, anybody else?
I'm here now. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
I was the one who left the message in the chat about looking at innovations for the transit issue. And I'm very pro-transit. I mean, every time I travel outside of my normal realms, you know, I do as much as I can to use public transit, just because I believe it's, you know, it's the most efficient means of travel in a city and so forth. But obviously, we're here in Vermont, rural for the most part. Even our largest city is considered a town in most other large metropolitan areas. So I think the answer to Vermont's transportation problems, I love the fact that they're planning around just towns itself, trying to make it so you don't need a car in town. I know Montpelier explored that for a while, where it would be a walk. It already is a walkable town if you live in the heart of downtown Montpelier and so forth. But many parts of our state are very rural. It's not easy access to the village or so forth. if you live out in the rural countryside. But I think that there is already the technology available that we could implement in a new way for Vermonters, which would be something like Uber, but essentially making it a mandate, not that a mandate that you have to be a driver, but a mandate that every person who has a driver's license in Vermont essentially becomes a Uber driver if they want to. And so you have many people just driving to their work or going shopping or whatever. They drive by a myriad of people who could use their opportunity to ride with them at a very good price. And it could be subsidized as well if it makes sense to do so. But of course, there are the problems with our rural cellular service, but you can do that with a lot of people now have internet, and you can make that connection through the internet if it's not through the cellular connection. But in any case, I think there are innovative ways. You could start thinking outside the box of, I need a bus driver and a bus to go to these destinations on a certain schedule. I think this would give the 24/7 opportunity, because there are people who drive at different times of the day throughout the day in Vermont. As an example, although I do have a car and I generally use it, there was a couple times in the last year or so, I had my car in the shop. And so I thought, well, let me see what I can do to use rural transportation. And so the first thing I did was I put out that I needed a ride to the Upper Valley from Stratford, where I live, which Stratford doesn't really have any public transportation to speak of. Listserv responded within a couple hours. I had 3 different offers for a ride to go to White River Junction the next morning was when I was planning. Of course, I had to plan this. It wasn't impromptu so much. I got the ride down to White River next to where I was going, and I did my thing. And fortunately, the timing of it finished up that there was actually a not advanced transit. It was a stagecoach, or now called Tri-Valley Transit, that was going from White River Junction to Sharon, which is the exit that I would normally take. But of course, there's no transportation from Sharon up to my home in Stratford. So I took advantage of that, got off, and then I thought, let's use the old-fashioned way. I'll just hitchhike from the exit off-ramp to my home in Sharon, or Stratford. Stuck out my thumb, and about 5 minutes later, because I have a friendly face and so forth, I got a ride from someone I didn't directly know, but he was definitely a Stratford person. And he says, hey, I think I know where you live, and got a nice, passing along information and friendly neighborly exchange. And it all probably took maybe 10 minutes longer than if I had not had my own personal car. In any case, it all worked out. And I think, but with technology, and again, I was saying this Uber or whatever you want to name it, could do a lot of that heavy lifting, just making connections of all people who are already driving. I'm not saying that everybody should just abandon their jobs and be an Uber driver. I think it would just be an opportunist thing where you happen to be driving by, and sure enough, there's somebody on your route that opens up on your app and says, I need a ride from here to there. And you say, oh, I'm going that direction. I'll take, that's essentially a virtual hitchhiking, and without having to stick your thumb out and stand on the side of the road kind of thing. So I think I'm hoping that that could be something that a state thing would, because I don't think private would work very well. I don't want to have a profiteering office. I would love to have a state oversight on it, and also maybe some ideas from a state committee members that would put together something that would incentivize both people to offer rides and also people to take rides, because I think there are many people who drive needlessly who could actually take advantage of a ride that might be virtually there if they were able to try it out. So that's my stick for the day.
Thank you, David. And I see Jamie had her hand up, and also Mark Hopman talked about the accessibility with wheelchair lifts, et cetera, might be an issue with Uber as well. Jamie, you want to?
Sure. So there's actually a couple conversations in the chat happening that I wanted to just answer some questions. Mark Hupman had asked about the town of Colchester and the ability to have bus transit service in Colchester. That's incorrect. Colchester is, they have a service contract with GMT. We do have some bus service to parts of Colchester. And the town manager in Colchester is a former GMT employee, and he's very pro-transit. So the town of Colchester has not restricted us from having transit buses. So that I just wanted to address that. And then there's some conversations happening about microtransit. And Green Mountain Transit was the first agency in the state to pilot a microtransit program in Montpelier. So that in addition to Gopher, which is successful in Washington County, the MyRide service is also available in Montpelier. I would say there's not been, it has not had, I wouldn't say it's unsuccessful. I would say it has had its challenges. And part of the feedback that we've received since launching that service in 2021 is not everybody has access to the technology needed to book and manage their rides for microtransit services. So that's been a challenge that we've had to sort of work through and overcome. We do have a call center. Those folks do assist, but the service area for microtransit, if it gets too big, you know, it kind of pushes out like how long people have to wait for services. And then we've also had a number of advocacy groups who, if you want to change your plan or change, you know, your trip, it can be difficult to do, especially on a service like the MyRide service that's busy when there's not available buses. It doesn't give them the same flexibility of just saying, oh, okay, like I'll change my plan and I'll just take the next bus home. And Connie, there was a study for St. Albans, and I know that you were part of that group that talked about it. And so that's still on the table, I think. You know, it was a very expensive service in St. Albans. And so it's not that conversation is still sort of ongoing, but with the budgetary challenges that we have at the moment, it's not it hasn't been feasible for us to implement a microtransit service in St. Albans.
Real quick, Jamie, my reaction too is I want to chat with you more.
Yes.
I do have 3 employers who, so there may be some investment to leverage with the business community there with that microtransit model, right? That idea where it's more controlled. I'm
Yeah,
curious
absolutely.
about that.
Okay, Rob, you had your hand up?
Yes, I just want to references. There's a lot of talk about the different ideas out there and quickly microtransit. But there was a study done in 2019 that was pushed by former state representative Kurt McCormick, who used to take the bus everywhere himself. He didn't own a car, but that was his choice. He did that basically for climate reasons. But when he was on the House Transportation Committee, he forced this study to be taken apart to look at how can we increase transit ridership. And there was many concepts, many ideas included in that report, but then we fell into COVID and transit ridership has dropped down. I want to just flag this because one of the ideas was like innovative ideas like microtransit, newer technology, newer rideshare programs. And from that report, we were able to actually get the legislature to create what was known as the Mobility Transportation Innovation Grants to help fund these programs. But every year coming into the legislative process, the Agency of Transportation recommends that program to be very limited in funds, or to make the program rules really hard to get at. And what we need to do is be very thoughtful about how we're spending transit dollars. Yes, we need to increase it, but we need to create these newer ideas and be innovative, not just relying on the same old status quo of either you have a car or you have that one fixed route. We need to find alternatives. So I just wanted to flag that for people on that. Is something to look into it. And I'm going to repost the report in there and you think about that, those ideas.
Great. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Destiny, see your hand
Hi.
up?
Yes, my name is Destiny. I'm with the Vermont Environmental Justice Network, and I just wanted to respond to Jamie Smith. I suggest reaching out to Brittany Watson. She's working on a digital equity campaign right now, and the goal is to provide accessible internet access for all Vermonters, training to use those devices and getting grants to give free devices like computers at schools and things like that, computers and phones for like incarcerated folks. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about the challenges and like relay that back to her for you, or I can provide contact info in the chat. But yeah, either way, this should definitely be a combined effort.
Thanks, Destiny.
Great. Anybody else? Well, we have come up a little bit past 1 o'clock. Any other questions, or somebody want to make a comment before we wrap things up?
Well, I'm gonna make another comment since there was silence in there. I just want to personally thank Matthew LaFleur for always pushing us at the Sierra Club to address these questions. I kind of joke he's my little conscience over there, because even though I grew up with a relative who was in a wheelchair from like when I was young, I saw this firsthand, but I keep forgetting about it because my lifestyle is a choice. I can bike anywhere I want. I actually, my wife and I only have one car, but I live in the middle of Mount Pelier and I bike all over the place. I walk everywhere, but not everybody can do that. So being reminded of those situations is very important. So Matthew, I want to personally thank you for doing that to remind me. And those in the other situations, please remember to tell people that's your situation. And it looks like Kirk has unmuted.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like to see what, it's my first meeting on this particular topic in the area, and I mentioned in a quick chat, well, it wasn't that quick, but all the collaboration, all the efforts, doesn't matter what topic we're talking about, it's always going to be down to the money and the lack of coordinated, organized efforts between all the various groups. I mean, I hate to tell you this, but it's not any different here in Vermont than it is in Florida or Georgia. Everybody and all the nonprofits are all working for good causes, good reasons. I imagine empathy, all the various buzzwords we hear for infinitum, day after day, month after year, all of them. It's just we're not working well together because everybody's protecting their own resources. I presume that's can be the only thing. Everybody supposedly has these let's get together and help, but as soon as you try to get together with anybody, it's like no, I got to check with the board or whatever. I don't know. I've been at this 35 odd years, and it's always the same. And I hate to say it, it's our own against our own best interests, because we're all we're not looking at the big picture, which is our voices as a group is always going to be the only path to solving the problem. Every time we break into little pieces and everybody has their own little agendas, nothing ever gets done because it's easy to push against the smaller groups. So anyway, I'm just saying, we don't usually have easy ways to connect after these calls. You get the message. There's no sounding board or no address board for if people want to try to coordinate efforts within the confines of these meetings. It's not made very simple for most folks. Not everybody's putting their email out there, and not everybody understands the message that comes from everybody specifically. You need further inroads to those conversations to nail down details or exchange ideas. So these are the great way to organize and to meet people, but I don't see the follow-up necessarily being usually available in any organized fashion. And maybe it's just my lack of ability in those areas. I don't know.
Well, this is, I think, the first time we've had a Transit Equity Day in a while, at least that I know of. Is that right, Rob? And
Yeah. So
hopefully with Sierra Club and National Resources Council and 350 will also, you can tie in with them and get together on with these groups to help push legislation properly. Rob, you want to say something?
Yeah, so Kirk, that is always a major challenge with a lot of the groups and nonprofits. We have our already set pre-arranged agenda. But I think what we're trying to do across the board is to elevate others along the way. So like Katie and I with the VNRC, and actually Jamie's participates in it too, and a couple other here participate in a coalition called Transportation for Vermonters, where we're trying to do a lot more outreach into communities, not just being within our insular groups, but it's very challenging to pull people in. And Matthew is tested with me as him being an activist. It's not easy to get to these public meetings, in-person meetings. Fortunately, the Zoom has allowed us to be able to broadcast further, and we're all in this process of trying to learn how to help people communicate and correct this. So it's, you can be involved with one of our organizations, but it's always not going to be easy. Like, Sierra Club, we meet regularly on once a month to talk within my organization, but then there's all the citizen groups. Peter at Center for Independent Living probably has some things. Deb Sachs in Burlington is doing a bunch of really good things, connecting with people. Then I see even Jordan's with VPIRG. So a lot of us are trying, and Destiny, you seem like you're involved with a whole lot of things. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do a better job connecting and coordinating and broadcasting those who don't have that opportunity to express themselves or have access to the legislative process. So it's a work in progress. We're trying.
No, there's nothing wrong with what was being done. And I've been on many, probably not as many as some of y'all, but a lot of calls over the years. And the gist of what I'm trying to suggest is a follow-up. Every topic is important to there. It's not that they should be separated or put into their own special boxes. It's the funding ultimately for anything has to come from, and I mean, again, I'm sort of sidestepping. I've been working on how to pay for all of these efforts for 30 plus years, but you can't get across to politicians or whatever leadership in whatever capacity unless you have enough coordinated, organized voices. And essentially that's it. I mean, it's as simple as that. If you don't have enough voices causing some kind of unrest in the political, am I going to be reelected mindset of whatever politician, and it doesn't matter what side of the aisle necessarily. Obviously, the Republicans seem to be the ones pushing against any renewable, sustainable, whatever, whether it's transportation, fixing, doesn't matter what it is. Again, I don't mean to be, cynical, but we're our own worst enemies when we're not doing a good job. And I've been working on going to communities out there and trying to organize in teams or whatever it is you want to call it, building groups so that they aren't left basically without representation. And that's, in a rural state like Vermont and a lot of other places, you can't find people that want to engage because they don't know how, yes, a Zoom, yes, this, but they're working, every day and trying to put the bread on the table and gas in the car, just like everybody else. So you have to kind of have out, you got to go where, the old saying, go where they're at, go where the people are at and find them. And then get them to understand that somebody's listening so that they can engage. And then, but there's people with better ideas on how to do that than me, but I feel the easiest way for me. And of course I have a vehicle so I can go. I'm not stymied by that necessarily at this moment, but it can come for any of us, whether you get, something happens to you, an accident or whatever. So I think it's just good to have these meetings. I just wish that we had, on whatever topic, whether it's the whatever it is, with the follow-up afterwards, I think is needed to be more effective. That's all.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. Takes a lot of work. This transportation for Vermont seems to be one pulling a lot of different groups together. Anybody else want to put your 2 cents in or have a question? Well, thank you all for coming. If there's nothing else, that I really appreciate it. And like I said, we have this chance for action and
There's Matthew. I do have a, sorry.
all
The
right, go
biggest
ahead.
question is, thank you, to finish this off, and thank you everybody for attending this webinar. This is an important, yes, not just for me, but members of the public that really needs transportation. And if we had to beg and ask for it, then we're not doing what we're not doing what what the elected officials are supposed to be doing. It's just, for me, it's like the biggest question, is how can we, and this is a big one, how can we go over that big hurdle? How can we move forward past, the financial bureaucracy of, the system? I mean, we already know Vermont systems are so old that they're falling apart. They're failing every single aspect of our lives. It doesn't matter where it's from, education to health insurance. It's just an old system that, is basically, we're seeing that right now. It's falling apart. The biggest question is, how can we move forward knowing that we have innovation, but how can we collaborate together knowing that you want to be compensated? The big issue that I tend to gripe with is the whole volunteerism mechanism. The whole volunteer mechanism is a guilt trip. Basically, I want to make you feel guilty for something that you had nothing to do to be involved in. But we got to compensate people sooner or later for this, because you want them to be shown appreciated for the job they're doing, the hard work they're doing. And my biggest question is how can we move forward knowing that we have an old aging finance system in Vermont like everything else? How can we move forward with a innovative way to make sure everybody's access needs are met? And that's the biggest question that that I want to hear answered from the elected official. How can we meet the needs of the vast majority of Vermonters, knowing that the financial system broken in Vermont, it needs to be worked on, it needs to be updated. How can we meet those needs, knowing that our system is broken? Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Well, thank you all for coming. I learned a lot and I hope we can reconnect and push forward these agendas. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Mark.
everyone.
Thank you.